Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're coming to you from the Autonomous Vehicles Department today.
Why do you say that?
Well, because Better Know Framework is all about autonomous driving.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Don't you want to know now?
I do want to know, but I'm also very excited about that. I'm up at the coast.
Yeah, that's right.
And I actually have a 3-channel recording rig working. So I'm using a NUC for one Skype channel, the laptop for another Skype channel, got the H6.
And you're doing this on just home Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I don't really buy home Wi-Fi. I'm not that guy. So I kind of bought the highest end, service available in this part of the world. But I get to watch the tidal flows right now. And I'm reminded, I was recently at Norwegian Developers Conference and the wife came along. So we actually took a day and we did a fjord tour in Bergen and so forth. And now that I own a house on the water, I was looking at these houses on the water that were too close to water. I'm like, how do they do that? And then I looked it up and it's like, that part of Norway only gets a 3-foot tide. I have a 16-foot tide.
Wow.
So, problems.
Yeah.
Anyway, the upside is I can see a lot of seaweed from where I'm sitting right now. But you were talking about autonomous cars.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's roll the music.
All right, dude, what do you got?
This is a GitHub project that's very popular right now. It's called Apollo Auto.
Oh, my goodness.
It's an open autonomous driving platform.
Wow.
Yeah, high-performance flexible architecture which accelerates the development, testing, and deployment of autonomous vehicles.
Because everybody should be rolling your own autonomous vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, what
this
could go
is
wrong?
a time vampire waiting to suck the life out of you.
It's true. That's a good description of it.
We like abstractions, of course, as developers, but what could be more abstract than a product that barely works, that you want to move forward with a bunch of like-minded people just to be able to get in on that architecture and the action of something like this, should it ever, work its way to mainstream.
A cynical person would look at this and call it a Dunning-Kruger emphasizer. So you think you can do autonomous cars because you think they're easy. Well, here's an open source library for it.
Yeah, have at it.
What could go wrong? But, the partners are a serious list of companies,
They are.
man.
That's true.
Yeah, Bosch and Delphi and Daimler, holy man, there's a lot of important people.
Right, it's not a basement project started by a couple of dudes.
These are many, many car companies and many, many serious producers of electronics, LiDAR manufacturers and the like. So, yeah, you can't argue with the roster.
True.
And of course, and us as software people, we're firmly convinced that autonomous driving is all about the software. So,
right, of course.
Why would you think any other way? Cool.
Yep, very cool.
Love it.
Enjoy that one. Sorry for your lost time and hours, but there you go. Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1356, the one we did with one Dustin Metzgar, talking about supporting aging software. Dustin's day job. That was a really fun conversation.
It was.
The different framework, and sort of the reality of when we talk about the personality of Microsoft, that no developer kind of left behind, right? That if you've committed to these bits, Microsoft's committed to those bits too, and they take care of them.
I was really impressed in that interview that Dustin really, really likes taking care of brownfield projects, whereas a lot of developers want to do the new and shiny.
Yeah, it's true. And admittedly, that show is from October 2016, so this is a comment from 2 years ago by the Hex Wrench, which is, what wrenches aren't hex, but okay. And he says, regarding your mid-show joke, this wasn't funny.
You tell me something I don't know.
He did attach a winky face emoji to it, the old school one, because this is why it isn't funny for him.
Okay.
Our CTO, now remember, this is 2 years ago, this is 2016. Our CTO still uses an Access 2003 app for managing database content. And when he wants to update a database with the latest content from the NDB, he uses macros. But I'm pretty sure you did a whole Halloween comedy bit about this.
Yeah.
And if someone has opened the MDB too, it isn't possible to run his macros. So then he goes all around the office finding out who locked it. Wow.
Unbelievable.
2003 called and wants its database back.
Yeah.
It happens regularly, and it would be funny if it wasn't so sad.
Oh, man.
We haven't been able to convince them to use another tool. Even newer versions of Access are not okay. And as long as Windows supports Access 2003, and since it's still running on Windows 10, we have to stick to it. And since we're all kind of convinced that Windows 10 is the last version of Windows, that means that app's going to run forever, man. Game over, man.
Game over, man.
There's nothing funny about this. This is pain. This is a big pile of pain.
Oh, it's a little bit funny.
Okay, a little bit. I did the finger gesture. Hex. Yeah, we feel it, buddy. We know exactly where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send you a copy of the music to code by, and at least you can drown out the tears. How's that? So put on the headphones, get it out of there.
The music to code by goes really nice with a little scotch. Just saying.
Yeah, and some sorrow.
A few tears, and your scotch will open it up for the bouquet of sadness.
So thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We stuff them in an MDB file. Put them on a file server lock. Somewhere.
A file lock. You know, I'm the kind of guy that would literally write a small piece of propagating malware inside of the network that just repeatedly locked that file from different locations.
You didn't need to. All you had to do was use the product. I remember having to call, what was it? There was 2 calls you had to do on the file before you could even open it. One was like, it's basically saying unscrew everything that's screwed up.
Oh, yes. There's sort of repair. Right. Because as soon as you open it, you write this little tag into it that tells anything else that tries to open it, it's already open because it's not actually semaphore. Goodness knows.
No.
But I just think it would be fun to have nobody having it open and it's still randomly opened by something somewhere.
Just to convince people to move off it.
Yeah. What if it just stopped working? What if you spent days trying to find somebody who'd locked it and just couldn't find them because it's every machine running a tiny little script of code.
Oh, you're evil.
Just locking and unlocking and locking and unlocking. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Well, anyway. Well, let's bring Dustin back here. Dustin Metzgar has been developing software professionally since 2003. His industry experience includes building software in areas like enterprise resource planning, supply chain management, insurance, and loan origination. He joined the .NET team at Microsoft around the time of .NET 4.0, the release of 4.0, and later worked on Azure services. Currently, Dustin and his team own a few libraries in the .NET Framework and .NET Core, an Azure service, and some parts of Visual Studio. Welcome back, Dustin.
Oh, hey, Richard and Carl. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you, man. And I think we've been planning on you doing this show for a while now.
Well, I think, we originally planned it because we wanted to do when the book was finished, but the book took a lot longer than I thought it would take. So,
AKA, it's a real book, right?
Yeah.
All book. And, one of the reasons I'm up the coast right now is this is my next couple of weeks of really starting to write chapters on the history of .NET. So I feel your pain, man. I'm just sort of looking at the mountain I'm about to climb and going, oh, man.
Yeah.
Are you self-publishing or are you?
I haven't decided. And I don't need to decide, right? Like at this point, I'm going to be, I kind of am open to any possibility. I want to get a few chapters, get a feel for how quick I write these days, and so sort of test some styles because it is a history book rather than a straight technical book, which I know how to write technical books. I've done that, but a history book's a little different, and so I'm actually going to take a stab at a couple of the chapters in 2 or 3 different styles and see how I feel about them, share them around a bit. But leading into, I think, a Kickstarter to see if I can, how people think about this and pre-sell some stuff, and then look at how to publish.
Oh, very cool. I'm interested in it.
Your book, .NET Core in Action, was published through who?
Manning. So I'm lucky enough to be published with the same publisher that does the C# in depth.
Yep. So, why did it take so long? Relatively speaking.
Well, part of it is kind of it's a moving target. When I originally started writing the book, it was still before .NET Core 1.0 was released, and they had Project JSON in it, and I had a whole chapter on Project JSON that I had to throw out, and then there's large parts of that in the book where I'm using that all over the place, and I have to replace all that stuff.
I hate that. One of the times I did a tech book, it was like for SQL 7, and just before, of course, you're working on the beta of SQL, and just before release, they redid all of the graphics, all of the iconography, everything in the UI and stuff.
Oh God.
And so I had to so it's like I didn't have to rewrite any copy, but I had to literally redo every screenshot in the flipping book.
So, look, do you want to talk about the topics in the book?
The table of contents really came out of mostly things that, like, when I started out working as a developer, that I wish I knew at that time. Because it's funny, it's like you're going along and all of a sudden this new area of something just opens up, and you have to pretend like, oh yeah, you already knew that because everybody else knows it. So.
None of which is actually true.
But things like signing the binaries, or putting localization in, or how to debug, or how to do performance profiling, things like that. It's just stuff I wish I knew, like, way earlier on. But
so it's not necessarily for people who are new to Core. Then it's sort of like using Core to learn .NET, or is it a little of both?
Yeah, it's like the target I really had was that kind of developer that's starting out and was going to start out with .NET Core, because I really think it's a great platform to start on. There's still enough in there that convert to .NET Core. I'm not trying to exclude those people.
Yeah.
How do you talk in terms of why you would use .NET Core over the standard framework?
I wasn't allowed to bring it up in the book, but Scott Hunter had talked about .NET Framework 4.8 as basically being the last release. It is kind of done.
They keep waffling on this. Like, it's almost like there's a threat of a .NET 5 on the horizon. But I think the latest move with Core 3, where they're starting to bring over the desktop components, speaks more to what if everything you do in standard framework works in Core?
Right.
Yeah, especially from WPF and that sense. It's interesting what they brought over and what they didn't.
Right. But they've also now set this paradigm of we don't have to make everything cross-platform. We could do a set of Windows SDKs.
Yeah, and just including a NuGet package or something that says, I'm on Windows, I want to use WPF, but still run on .NET Core. So.
Right.
I think it's an interesting plan. I really like the way they've done it. There's all this kind of like obsolete stuff that they can't get rid of. Linked to SQL and the old remoting system and all that stuff. It's all still in there, and it all still has to be supported because they can't take it out. But
yeah,
in .NET Core, it's kind of like they can start again.
Well, and it doesn't sound like they're ever going to stop supporting it. Like it's no point. You figure the VB6 runtime is still in Win 10, and apparently Access 2003. So they're not going to stop support on it, but I guess I got to imagine at some point they're not going to do more development on it. System.web, by all accounts, is simply not coming across.
Right. And all the innovation is going into .NET Core.
Right.
The other thing too is that you can use whatever platform, whatever OS, whatever tools you want to use for .NET Core. And with the book, I try to stay away from aligning with a particular IDE or anything like that. Just kind of everything can be done with Notepad or VI or whatever in a command line.
Oh, that's nice.
There's some parts where it gets a little like performance profiling. There's really not that much cross-plat, but there's some things that you can do Linux and Mac to do profiling and debugging and things like that. So
it certainly works. It works in Studio as well. So if you're already living in Studio, this is not a big deal. It's just this idea that there's lots of people happy out there with VS Code.
Oh yeah, and I definitely used it for not only writing the samples for the book, but also for writing the book itself.
Right.
It's really flexible. I don't know how you're writing your book. For me, I used ASCII Doc.
Oh yeah, I am learning Scrivener. As encouraged by Rob Connery. That's the tool he used for his A Curious Moon book, the Postgres educational book that's actually got a lot to do with Enceladus. So having been one of the reviewers on his manuscript and arguing mightily with him about it, I might add, to the point where he said, am I going to jeopardize our friendship if we continue on this? Which I appreciated. Like, we really argued mightily on it. But I also, if that's the tool that he likes, I really had to take a look at it. It's pretty cool, but it's, again, it's not for tech books so much as it is for other kinds of books. So it's a good tool for that. Yeah. But yeah, if you've got to manage code inside a document of any kind, VS Code's awesome for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's other tools for it. Like I picked up this ASCII DocFX, which is like a whole IDE, and it's written in Java, and they try to do everything in it. But I ended up just using it to create PDFs.
Interesting. I will include a link to the ASCII Doc book editor.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually, because it's very much like Markdown. So you're just writing the text, and you're not too much caring about the formatting and things like that. And the publisher can come in and they can mess with it.
So Manning likes it.
Yeah, and but it's weird because it's not consistent. Sometimes they want me to give them a Word file, and sometimes they want me to give them a PDF, and then other times they're perfectly fine with the ASCII docs.
Interesting,
right? Hey guys, hold that thought for just 1 minute while we pause for this very important message.
Hi, this is Richard. The Dev Intersection Fall Show this year will be December 3rd to 6th in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand Hotel. The lineup is awesome. Scott Guthrie, Scott Hanselman, Scott Hunter, yes, all the Scotts. But also a ton of great industry speakers for some insight on what's coming up in the world of .NET. Core 3 is bringing client technology like WinForms and WPF into play. Could it be time to migrate your existing desktop apps to this new technology? Come learn more at Dev Intersection, December 3rd to 6th in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand. Go to devintersection.com to register and use the code .NETROCKS to get a discount.
And we're back. Dustin Metzgar is here. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Richard Campbell. .NET Rocks is what you're listening to. And we're talking about the challenges writing a book about .NET Core when it's such a moving target. And maybe we should dive into some .NET Core topics.
And it's also Mac and Linux if you're running LLDB or basically you run LLDB and then you can load SOS pretty much in the same way and run the same kind of commands.
Sure, yeah.
You have a debugger that's basically made for native applications, and there's the whole set of commands and everything that are built into the debugger for going after native the compiled code, but SOS actually is made for the managed part for .NET. It actually makes things very easy to get at memory and see the types and what's in the heap and that kind of thing. It's got a lot of pretty powerful commands to see what's going on with .NET. And basically everything works just the same with .NET Core as it did with .NET Framework. So if you're used to SOS, it's everything's working. It's pretty cool. It's almost like nothing changed.
So maybe we should just tell everybody what the SOS debugging extension is and why you need it.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, I guess, to put into a beginner's book, because when I first started out, I showed this is how you debug in in VS Code and VS for Mac and traditional Visual Studio. But then I also talk about how you do command line debugging. And I think it's, for me personally, it's I didn't know that it was possible to do command line debugging until well into my my professional career. Because you always had the IDE, you were always using that way. And it's nobody ever introduced me to an actual command line debugger that I could run on a production system, which is, really useful if you get into this, into a situation where, production's down and you can't really, reproduce it in a test environment or on your dev machine.
Yeah.
Have you heard the story of where the name comes from? Like SOS actually stands for Son of Strike.
Huh.
So I've heard the name.
This is, again, only because I'm working on the history of .NET do I have this kind of stupid trivia in my head. So the code name for the CLR was Lightning, right?
Right.
And so when they were building it and they got sort of the initial iterations to sort of bootstrap the thing, they actually called the startup the Strike DLL, right? They named the file Strike. As a sort of the bootstrapper for the CLRs, just right at the very beginning, right? And all the kinds of silly things they're doing. They're sort of figuring out what they were supposed to do and stuff like that. And so they didn't want to actually hand out the Strike DLL to anybody because it was just a bit too powerful the way it poked into Windows and it sort of controlled things. And when it failed, it was kind of catastrophic to them. It's like, you're back to the whole, if you make a mistake, you basically blue screen the computer.
Right.
And so they had to make a lightweight one for debugging, which they called the Son of Strike. And then it happened to work out as SOS, which is, how cool was that? That version doesn't actually come along until 1.1.
I think that's when I started with .NET, was around the 1.1 days. So.
1.1, 2003.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Code names create silliness. And the funny part, of course, is like I just added the link to the show notes for the SOS debugging from Microsoft Docs. And it's like, dude, you made that decision in 2002. And here we are in 2018 still using that name. Like these names never die. It goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and we continue to carry it into .NET Core. So.
But it is an interesting thought, the whole command line level debugging and what that looks like, how you actually understand the kind of errors you're getting, what's going on there.
There's a chapter on doing performance. And so I had two things. So one of the other things about this kind of moving target is that when I originally started the book, I was using xunit.performance because I thought that was going to be the thing,
right?
But now it's benchmark.net, which is actually way better. But I still cover xunit.performance in the book, but because it introduces some other things too, but it also covers the scenario I wanted to talk about. But it's it gets you started on here's how you would write a performance test, which is really all I wanted to cover. And then then I do profiling with Purview. And Purview being a Windows-only tool, but you can actually run the collector on a Linux or a Mac machine and then export the file over to a Windows machine and open it in Purview and actually go through the stacks and everything. So it's totally possible to use Purview for cross-platform stuff, but you still have to have a Windows box somewhere. So.
Right. So you use the window box to host your performance measurements, but you can code to anything you want.
Yeah, and it's I think we basically kind of have to use that style. I need a profile, so we'll capture one on a Linux machine and then copy it over and then take a look at it to see what's going on.
Right.
And it's helpful for things like if you've got everything in a Docker container or something like that. So.
Did you do a lot of coding against Linux with C# just to have the experience or stuff you actually need?
I did enough to try it out, because for the most part, things mostly worked
right
on every platform. For system.transactions, we had some things that didn't work on Linux the same way they worked on Windows, and then you had to try to debug and figure out what was going on the Linux side to see what was different.
Right.
But for the most part, everything was worked pretty much the same. So you didn't have to do a whole lot on the Linux side.
Yeah, they always the question when you're talking about a cross-platform tool is you're busy building in one environment, and then you get to a place you're like, okay, this needs to be running over here now, and then something is different. Like that can be a real battle.
And when you collect a profile with Purview, you can see when it does GCs and like when there are exceptions thrown, you never would have seen them otherwise.
Right. Yeah, the Purview is cool in the sense that you see sort of the underpinnings of what's actually going on in .NET that doesn't normally surface to the user, even to the dev. Like it's just there's a lot of chatter. You're wondering you're wondering what that pause was. There's a bunch of stuff going on, and certainly garbage collection. And I've done so much web perf work over the years, and it's like garbage collection can be a big deal. What ultimately will kill IIS in high load situations is sort of a spiral of memory consumption and problems with large object releases and repeated GCs that block threads. And I'm getting chills, man. It's like this. The number of times I've worked through the death spiral of IIS under load.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
Yeah, it's time to run garbage collection on all the debris left over from jokes that were not funny. Stuff like banana peels, exploding shoes, and bicycle horns.
There are some lob objects there.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. It's actually time to give away a $200 Amazon card to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club, compliments of Progress Telerik. But first, let me tell you about Conversational UI from Progress Telerik and Kendo UI. Conversational UI are chatbot framework agnostic user interface controls and components that enable .NET and JavaScript developers to create modern conversational chatbot experiences in their web, mobile, and desktop applications. The industry's first packaged set of user interface components built specifically for chatbots are available as part of the company's Telerik ASP.NET Ajax, ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, WinForms, WPF, Xamarin products, and Kendo UI for jQuery, Angular, Vue, React, PHP, and JSP libraries. By implementing key UI design features such as calendars, date pickers, list views, and others that are included in the tool sets, developers will be able to improve chatbot conversation through visual elements that enhance the natural flow of conversation. For more about this really innovative library, visit telerik.com/conversational-UI.
Well, all right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Marcin Dazkowski.
Oh, congratulations, Marcin.
Golf clap for Marcin.
Golf clap for you.
Who just won a $200 Amazon gift card from Progress Telerik, our good friends over there, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you'd like to be a member, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world, and every show we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the fan club. But you got to sign up to win. And we also like to ask our guests, Dustin, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
Probably one of those VR headsets, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can still buy a HoloLens for $3,000. Although they had a major firmware update this particular week, and I haven't got my HoloLens to work right since. So, we're so due for new hardware in that space. Like it's time, man.
So what's not working? The pinch zoom, the click.
Oh, and I've trouble logging in. And you know how much of a pain in the butt it is. If the login credentials aren't working correctly in HoloLens, you literally have to hard reset the machine.
Right.
And so I'm like, and it was one of those moments where it's like, I know what this hill is, and I haven't got the time to climb it. So I just took the headset off, put it down. It's like, I'll deal with you later. Yeah. But I was excited to see a big update. Like, it's been a while that HoloLens gotten a major patch. Like, it speaks to there's some activity going on because it's been awfully quiet lately.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on with it. I'm not allowed to talk about, but
yeah, probably not. But we're perfectly willing to let you dash your career on the rocks on the show, Dustin. So if that's what you feel like doing, knock yourself out, buddy. Like, it's okay.
Well, I'm done with the book now, and I have plenty of time to game, but that would give me more time. So that's
that's a lot of time to game. And on the VR side, do you see a lot? I don't see a lot of action these days. I mean, for $5,000, because whether it's an Oculus or any of those other headsets, they all are computer dependent. So you got to build a torquey machine, and you really need like a 1080 class NVIDIA video card, which is going to be your most expensive part because the flipping Bitcoin miners are buying them all.
Well, I think it's interesting because for a while there, I thought PC gaming was kind of dying out because you had consoles that could do everything. But with VR, it brings it back a little bit.
Right. And Microsoft just recently announced that the latest Xbox, they're not going to do a VR headset for the Xbox. We thought VR would come to console, and it doesn't seem to be happening. So, yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if that's more of a statement of, well, VR is just not actually taking off, so why spend the money and narrow the market even further, see Kinect.
Yeah.
Versus, not that I'm cynical or anything. Oh, wait.
Actually, you are.
Well, and I've got friends in the industry. Like, I have buddies that are working on trying to build the definitive VR game. The game that's like, you have to play, in the end, what sold Xbox? Halo. Right?
Yeah.
So you need that marquee title that's like, this is only where you want to experience as a VR and no other way. And there just isn't one yet. And it was one of the interesting insights that Dave, my buddy, said, the thing you need to understand about like a first-person shooter is, in order to keep the game interesting, that 3-foot experience, you're actually running at about 30 miles an hour. And when you put that on your face, it makes you nauseous. And it's like, it's freaky. So the pace of the game all changes, and that bugs people. Like, it's not, you can't just convert an existing game into VR. It doesn't work. It has to be different. And I think they're all groping around right now trying to figure out, well, what makes a phenomenal VR game beyond just scaring the snot out of you?
Well, I saw one that I particularly like. It's called Abduction with an O.
Abduction.
It's made by the same publisher that does Myst.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it's a Myst kind of game done with a Unreal Engine. I think it's Unreal, but it's beautiful actually. So it's and the pace, and then you don't have to worry about running from one place to another or anything like that, or shooting at anything.
I want to get back to your book here for a minute and talk about, if you had to pick one little nugget that is like gold from your book, that maybe you know it in your heart and other people have told you, what might that be? Or do you have to buy it to find that out?
Probably my favorite chapter is on localization, which is kind of weird because it was never really a favorite subject of mine until I started writing the chapter. But it's interesting because with .NET Framework, when you added some localization, you were basically creating this resources file, which is usually a resx file, and it's an XML file underneath. And then you have this editor, and you can put strings in there and icons, images, things like that. But with .NET Core and particularly .NET Standard, you're kind of just only doing strings. And I don't know if you've ever seen the contents of a resx file, but it's
only when necessary.
It's nasty.
Which I can't remember the last time.
It's an XML file that's got like a DTD at the top of it. That's
the best part.
It's strange. It's like for if you're gonna do like text editor, command line development, the resx file just doesn't make sense to me. But so in the book, I talk about how to use something called a res text file. There's which is just literally you put the key and then equals and then you put the value, and that's it. And that's one string at a time, and you can put comments in it and things like that. But I show how to use that kind of stuff. So.
Have we gotten any automated tools, since all these great translators, Google Translate and all that have come out, that just handle it? At least get you a framework that you can of resources you can edit.
I had some help with some of the translations. So somebody had do Arabic because, and it's actually in the book, which is kind of a little side story on that. I'm glad we caught it in the proofreading part, because when they put the Arabic text in there, it just showed up as little squares. It's like, red flags going up. This has to be fixed like right now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man!
But basically, I included Arabic because it's right to left, and then my friend was basically telling me that if you do something like you write Turkey in and have Google Translate or Bing Translate or whatever do the translation from that to Arabic, it will it will give you, turkey, the animal.
Right. As opposed to turkey, the country?
Right. But if you write hot turkey, it will give you the country. So,
oh no.
So I talk a little bit about in the book is like, you can do a Google Translate or a Bing Translate, but you have to be careful because, you don't know what's coming out the other side, and it could be wrong or it could be even offensive.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea just to have a framework in place. But ultimately, if you're going to publish text in another language, you really need to have somebody read it, edited it.
Yeah, humans are required.
Humans are required. Still, it would be nice to just push a button and say, these are the languages I want, so that the heavy lifting is done for you anyway.
Yeah, and in other parts of that too, the localization, there's like traditionally in .NET Framework, there was the resource manager, and that's still available in .NET Core, although it doesn't work quite as well as it should. Actually, the resource manager can't find your satellite assemblies unless you've built a self-contained app. If you just use .NET Run, it won't find your resources, which was fun to debug at the time. So when you do like a .NET pack from the CLI, it doesn't include the resource assemblies. And then I basically go through the steps of like, how would you build a package, like a NuGet package that has the satellite assemblies in it. But yeah, I think that whole area of like how to do localization was pretty interesting. So,
do you think they got it better in .NET Core overall? Because the opportunity to reboot this basically meant they did it from the beginning. So
one thing they did was they added this Microsoft Extensions localization library, which is used in ASP.NET Core, and I show how you can use it in just regular .NET Core, just from a console app.
Oh, nice.
And what's nice about it is like you can say you have this thing called a string localizer, and the key is basically the English or the default translation. So you don't have to have a separate resx file or resdex with the keys in it. You can just have in the code, you can just put it straight in there, which I think is nice because you can search for, like, if you get an error message, you can search for that error message and actually find it where it is in the code.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, we've done a couple of shows on I guess the current term now is internationalization.
Right.
Yes.
This globalization.
Well, they still use the term globalization and localization, but the overall seems to be now it's internationalization.
Yeah.
And it's not that simple, and I think the tooling hasn't been all that good for quite a while, but it seems to be better now, and certainly more people are concerned about it.
Yeah, I think it is getting better. One of the drawbacks I see, though, if you do this that localization extension and you put all the strings in like a string localizer and you use that like maybe the English translation as the key, if you never create that resx file, then when you actually do want to create a resx file in another language, you have to scan through your code and find all those keys.
Right.
Which, but now it's like you have to go through and look through all your code and find out where you use that string localizer and find all those keys and then write them down and give them to somebody else to do the translation. So
retrofit's always the hard part.
Yeah.
Better to sort of think in those terms right away.
But, I talk about a way to, some strategies to get around that in the book. Like you can make like a dummy language, because there's no like limit on what region or culture you're using. You can actually just create your own, like on the fly.
Right.
Yeah. Are you still digging into existing projects?
Am I killing anything or?
No, you still like it. Are you still enamored?
No, I really do like keeping things running. It's kind of it's interesting to read somebody else's code and then try to decipher it and simplify it and write tests against it and then refactor it. I don't know. For a lot of the projects that I own, they're not being moved to .NET Core. So 4.8 is going to be the last one. So at least I'm not the one, killing these things.
Right.
I mean, they're not really dying, but it's, they're still supported, and
right.
I'll still be working on a group to support it, but
they're coughing and wheezing.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, I just don't know how that all is going to. There's so much code in standard framework out there in the world. Hunter in Build was talking about working with a company that literally had thousands of internal applications. Microsoft never leaves that behind. So, what does it look like to do anything about that? Because you got to think most of that code may not even be compilable anymore. They've got a running executable, and they're never going to touch it again.
Right.
Yeah, and it's what makes it so hard to work in the .NET framework is like if you change anything, you can break somebody,
sure.
and that's costly. It just takes a lot of time to go and patch it, and we have things like app settings. You can go into the config file and you can turn things off, or use it to make it behave like an older version of the .NET framework, and
right.
But that's some research to figure out this thing that breaks every now in production, is there an app setting for it that I can set it back to the way it was? And so,
yeah, ways to work around all of that. In your book, you do talk specifically about building microservices. Can we talk a little bit about that? How do you define that?
So I borrowed the definition of a microservice from another Manning book, basically. Just something that owns its own data,
right? And
is has a well-defined interface, and it can be completely replaced underneath that interface. And I think ASP.NET Core, is fantastic for creating that kind of stuff, because you can build that, put it into a Docker container, and then it's like that microservice is just that container. And for the book, I talked about how to mark down into HTML, and I'm using some extension, the same one that they use for the new MSDN, the new Microsoft Docs. They have this library that converts Markdown to HTML.
Cool.
I use that, but I also put the Markdown into Azure Storage, like Azure Blob Storage, and I show how to do that without the SDK, just like literally sending the HTTP request to Azure Blob Storage.
Cool. And yeah, just a great project, right? Like that's a common thing to do, and I appreciate the thinking. Until this announcement around Core 3, this seemed to me like a lot of what people were really going to use Core for was building services and stuff. Now, I appreciate you got the book out now before Core 3 shows up, and you have to add all those chapters on WPF and WinForms.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's actually, this is kind of like there's 4 books from Manning that I think are all kind of related. So mine is kind of like the base level, like get you started on .NET Core, and I tried not to step too much on everybody else's toes.
That's cool.
But because I introduce ASP.NET Core and how to build like a microservice, but I don't really go in depth into ASP.NET Core. And I also talk about how to use Entity Framework Core. But I do compare contrast against a library called Dapper, which they use for Stack Overflow. And they ported that to the .NET Standard, and I actually use that in our Azure services.
Right.
It's a wonderful library.
Yeah, it looks like you have the in-action books and the in-depth books. Right? Like the C# in-depth is Skeet's book, which goodness knows that's the right title for Skeet.
Right.
But the in-action seem to be sort of the more practical, here are the things you need to do to get going.
And that's, I like the style of the in-action, because it's like for people in a hurry, you're
right.
Which is usually like when you're a professional programmer, that's usually the way it is. It's
right.
You need to learn how to use this thing so we can work on it. And, this kind of like, I think you can kind of read from beginning to end and follow through and, actually learn a whole bunch of different, get started in a whole bunch of little subjects around .NET Core. And then if you want to go in depth, you can go and learn some, pick up another book and get started there.
And
do you have a sense of what is the biggest challenge for people who are just starting on .NET with .NET Core? Well,
I think as far as the biggest challenge is just understanding all the terminology. And I get into some of that, like, for instance, like the words framework and runtime and platform are used almost interchangeably, and
right.
It's kind of frustrating when you get to that. It's because there's like framework has a very specific meaning, and runtime does also have a specific meaning, but then platform is like this generic, vague term that means almost anything.
Right. And, if you don't have a sense of the history of how these things came about, that can be really confusing. Why don't you just do it this way?
Yeah.
So you have, words and things that are sort of a lot of cruft built up over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's some of that stuff is, can also work the other way. Like if you were a .NET Framework developer and you're used to things being a certain way, and then all of a sudden you go to .NET Core and something's just off. My typical example of that is reflection. Like they moved some of the types around for reflection, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad.
Yeah, reflections had a tough history, because it's certainly slow, but it had good parts and bad parts to it, and it's been reflection just didn't work in Core for quite a while.
Yeah, and it's they've made a lot of improvements.
It's one of those technologies where you may or may not sort of grapple with why would I do this? What does this do for me?
Another thing too is for .NET Framework developers, if you're moving to Core, you might not understand all the difference between the Core and .NET Core and .NET Standard. Like there's a design for .NET Standard that I'm hoping that we move towards, where it's you try to target the lowest version of .NET Standard you can run your code on, so that it's open to more platforms. But when you really look at it, like the platforms that currently support .NET Standard is, why not just target 2.0 all the time?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping like eventually we can get because you can run .NET Core 2 on a Raspberry Pi, but say like a NetDuino, it still runs .NET Micro Framework, and Micro Framework doesn't support .NET Standard yet. And but I'm hoping we actually get to that point where we can have like an embedded or a microcontroller that's running some version of the .NET Standard.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's going to be Micro Framework, if they're going to get there a different way.
Yeah.
It feels to me like the .NET Micro Framework has been left behind.
Yeah, and it's good or bad. It's I would like to have something that kind of made that argument more solid about like why you should target lower versions of the .NET Standard.
Yeah. Well, I've always had the sense that nothing lower than 2.0, right? Like that the earlier versions are really sort of incomplete, and that the 2.0 is where they got to a point where they were kind of happy with the feature set, and now it's getting more platforms to this.
Yeah, and so like in a lot of libraries they do. So say like Dapper, they do. I think it's 1.3 and 2.0. So you can multi-target and then have different feature sets for the different. Different frameworks, which is really nice actually, because you can expand to other things that were only available in .NET Standard 2.0. But and the idea is that like the lower version of .NET Standard should be more universally applicable, but
Moore's law still applies. Like the argument is these really small, lightweight, low-cost devices, but the power of those things is going up so quickly now that like 2.0 should be enough for them too.
Yeah, especially, you've got the Raspberry Pi running .NET Core 2.
Yeah, and I think that's more of a statement of how much power is in a Raspberry Pi now than necessarily they got the framework that small. There's just a lot of clout running around in very small system-on-a-chip configurations.
So Dustin, what's next? What's in your inbox?
Well, internally at work, we're taking this kind of old monolithic N-tier architecture, and we're turning it into microservices.
Is it Windows?
Yeah, well,
when you say we have a monolithic code base, you're talking about working at Microsoft. You've got a few monolithic code bases out there, my friend.
Guess.
I'm just
Good
guessing.
Guess.
I'm going to leave it generic because that pretty much describes almost everything here. But so that part's been interesting, and then I'm kind of taking a break from the whole book writing thing because that was very stressful. So Yeah, I still got panels on my home, and so they're still doing the incentive.
Oh yeah,
for Washington State. So, but once that runs out, then it's I'm kind of thinking about those Tesla batteries because
Powerwall.
Yeah. I think that'll really improve because if you're not being paid by the power grid anymore, then you might as well just store that energy for yourself. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and see if I can get the neighbor to knock down that big tree that's in.
There's an interesting problem. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, Dustin, thanks for talking to us, and congratulations on your book, and we're looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to talk to you guys again. Thank you.
Always. And we'll talk to you, dear listener, next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.